We're going to start with priming the model black. I don't mix the flow improver with the primer in the pot, I just let it flow through, and then I just do work as continuously as I can. When you're priming, do your best to dust it on and not let it pool up, drip, or spiderweb on the model. It's going to be a lot of trigger work, mostly air, about 90% air, 10% primer going through the airbrush. This is your best way to get a nice consistent prime over the entire model without clogging up details. Some parts of an already assembled mini like this one is mostly assembled. It's going to be tough to get in some of the details there and prime them, but if you keep dusting it on and going over in thin layers, it'll work its way in. Base coating the shadows on this model was a little difficult as there was nothing really underneath to catch the shadows since most of the armor panels were facing outwards or upwards. So I had to kind of cheat a little bit and kept it to the lower 1/3 of all the armor panels to be base coated with a darker green. There were a few spots that were truly facing down, of course we got those. And then we'll work a gradient up from there with the subsequent layers. Facing the midtones here is going to be a little different since we had to do the shadows and kind of cheat those. Instead of doing a straight on with this, we're going to do straight on and also downward at about 45 degrees. This way we'll get a nice gradient up from the shadows and can start working up into the highlights from here. Shadows and midtones applied, we can go ahead and start spraying the highlights pretty much straight down and also focus on some of the larger areas of the armor panels. Just like with priming, you want to dust on these layers and build them up slowly. Applying them too quickly, you're going to get spider webbing and pooling of paint everywhere, and it's just going to clog detail and just not look very good. Here we're going to start picking out some of the finer details, putting the airbrush away for the most part. We're going to take size 2 brush, thin down a little bit of paint, and start picking out all the details of cracks in the armor and some of the holes, focusing on anything that's going to catch light, mainly on the bottoms of everything that's exposed. What you want to do is if you have something that's running straight up and down and there's really no bottom to highlight, pick one side or the other and try and stay consistent throughout the entire model like that. While we're highlighting all these details in the armor, you might as well start edge highlighting as much as you can. Anything that's facing outwards or upwards, anything that would naturally catch the light, go ahead and edge highlight it. But if you do come across a detail that looks interesting to you that you want to call out, even if it doesn't really fit that light pattern, you can go ahead and call it out. Just don't get too carried away with those details. With our base coat and details dialed in, we can go ahead and start washing the miniature, bring out even further detail, and start adding a new tone to these greens. Get a earthy brown in there with this Agrax Earth shade. While we're doing the wash, try to keep moving. You don't want to leave any tide marks or blatant lines just from the wash drying, and then you continue work later. Pick out a panel or an area, start from one side, go to the other, and really try not to let it pool too much because gravity will pull this down, but you still want it to get in all the recesses and kind of line all the details. So just keep working it until you're happy with it, and do your best not to let it pool up, run, or dry out too fast. That first round of wash, I wanted to come back in here and kind of, pin wash some certain areas. Sometimes the wash doesn't settle where you want it to, and you want to go back there and hit those details. This metal color line from Vallejo is pretty amazing. Didn't need to thin anything down, straight out of the pot. I keep it on the plastic cup because I have this weird thing about not keeping metallic paints on my wet palette. It's probably fine to do it, it's just something I don't like to do. But in any case, this paint went on like butter. It was really smooth. There's no problems with it. Lays down and stays right where you put it for the most part. It doesn't run. Again, we're not thinning this down, so it shouldn't be an issue. But hit all the metal parts here. Any details you pick out, just try and be, cognizant of all the stuff you did before. You don't want to go over all the panels we just washed and, ruin all the good shading we did with the airbrush and the wash. So after we're done with all the steel metal parts, when we go on to the gold, again, same line of colors from Vallejo's metal color. Again, we got to be really careful not to paint over onto what we just did. It's sometimes a good idea to have a damp brush or a Q-tip on hand, on standby, so you can kind of mop up any mistakes you might make. It's gonna be a little difficult because you don't want to try and repaint that gradient we did with the airbrush in the wash, because it's gonna be really difficult to replicate that. So if you make a mistake, just clean it up as fast as you can and then move on from there. But this is gonna be a lot of gold trim work. Easiest way to paint this is sometimes similar to edge highlighting, where you use more the edge of the brush, the side of the brush rather, and kind of drag along the surface of the gold trim. There are going to be parts where you're going to have to get there and use the tip of it, but for the most part, most of these details aren't raised enough to try and get around to the sides of them. You'll notice in this video, right there, I try to get to the sides so it doesn't seem like gold leaf placed on top. It seems like an actual, dimensional piece. But this works just like the other metal paint. Flows really nice, no need to thin it down at all. Not too much to be said here. We're just doing another wash over metal this time. This is to kind of give it an oily, grimy feel. It says Nurgle after all. This is not going to be sparkling clean and showroom quality. It's going to be pretty messed up. So what we want to do is get all this Nuln oil in there. Again, nothing's thinned down or diluted. Just try and get into all the details. Don't let it pool anywhere too much. Just keep working it, just like the other washes. Right there, I noticed that I totally missed one of the metal bands around the Blight hauler's body with the metal paint, so I do end up going off camera and fixing that and coming back to finish and wash that up. Alright, we're starting to look decent here. Details and everything are starting to show through, and our work's starting to look pretty good. So we'll go through with another wash just over the gold pieces to give them some definition. When you get to some of the gold pieces that are on, more flat pieces on the armor panels, you can go ahead and wash the edges to kind of give them a drop shadow, give them a bit more depth, because a lot of them you really couldn't get to the sides of them, but they almost wanted to be painted. So some of them I hit when they were thick enough, but those that didn't, I ended up giving them a bit more of a pin wash with this to give them some more depth. Flesh base coat was a bit of a challenge, as Vallejo's basic skin tone from their model color line is, even though it's pigment heavy of a line, this had not the greatest coverage. So this was about 2 or 3 thinned coats over that darker base. Now it's going to have, this is going to be a bit of a challenge because a lot of pre-painted stuff in there, like the metal we just did. So if you make a mistake, you're going to have to go back and fix it, obviously, but do your best in here not to make this. There's a lot of stuff overlapping. The flesh is bubble gumming over pistons and metal bands. So just do your best, keep it clean. If you make a mistake, no big deal, just go back and tidy it up. The mandibles on the front of the Blight hauler, I was kind of spitballing at this point. I was looking at the box art, which obviously I'm kind of staying close to that theme for my army. So I just picked out pink with a bit of a, not too much of a plan, really no plan, and just figured I'd wash it with purple or maybe some Drakenhof Nightshade, just kind of bring in some details, then go back in and highlight some parts. But again, this is just kind of spitballing, and like the name implies, there is really no plan. I'm just kind of going with it and see what looks best. After the flesh is done and is fully dried, this is one of my more fun parts to do. Starting to wash the flesh itself. This is my own little recipe I kind of came up with. I don't know if anybody else has done something similar. I do the basic flesh tone, then I'll lay down the crimson over the entire thing, trying not to let it pool too much. And then after that's dried, get the Juki, I don't know what how it's pronounced. Use that and kind of glaze it in where metal meets flesh to kind of give it a bruised appearance. You don't want to totally go in and wash this. Again, use it more of a glaze, and you're going to go back and forth and work it over and over. This will give it a good transition though, and it'll give it a bit more believable bruised flesh feel. At this point, both washes have been, well, washed or glazed in, and I wanted to pick out some of the kind of sharper details of the flesh, stuff that's been pinched and tweaked to the point of no blood circulating through it, and it's just more pale. So I'm just going to pick out some of those details. Right there is a vein I'm doing. I didn't record this later, but I do go back in with Midnight Blue, a glaze of Midnight Blue from Vallejo's Game Color, and make a blue vein out of it. At this point, it was off camera. I totally forgot to record some of this. I went in and started glazing, real light glaze, back over the wash I had just done on more of the raised and open parts to kind of give it a translucent feel. Like the flesh is not this solid opaque wall, but it in fact does have a subsurface scattering effect to it to give it some more life and some more depth. Base coating any of the bone fragments sticking out of the armor. This is not the most fun thing in the world for me. I just always found this to be a boring segment. It's just bone. You can only do so much with it. Best thing to do is paint it on. I end up giving it a wash and just pick out some details. Maybe a light dry brush towards the ends. Right here. So we'll go into the metal dry brush. Come back to the bone. Dry brushing is one of the quickest techniques, and it's pretty easy for anybody to pick up. Just get a small brush load and then wipe off the majority of it. So what you're doing is you're not wasting paint, you're getting rid of the medium but keeping the pigment. So I don't think you're wasting paint, because you're not. And what we're going to do is dry brush downward, try and pick up the raised edges like the light's hitting it from above. I think I go back and forth on a few parts because they were being difficult and I couldn't pull out detail. But what we're doing is we're just bringing back some of the metal sheen, because we really, you know, knocked it down with some of that Nuln Oil. The red lens, there's two of them. There's one right on the front here, and then there's another one over the left armament on the other piece. This was kind of fun to paint. It was just a real quick little bit of wet blending before anything on this base coat dries. It's still all pretty wet. I go right in with the next color and go up about 2/3 of the way with it, and then the final hot orange I'll mix in there. So I go back and forth just to kind of blend it together, because you're not airbrushing in that small. I mean, some guys can, I can't, but it was a fun little thing to wet blend. Again, there's only two. The other one's much smaller. You might only want to do 2 colors, but this bigger one, we were able to fit 3 colors and then a highlight. Again, a bit of the boringness of painting bones and skulls. Skulls can sometimes be fun. There's a lot more detail, but these bones were just, I hate to say it, but it was more of let's just get this out of the way. Again, not the most fun part of the model, but still gotta do a good job, because, you know, we've been working hard on this so far. Might as well knock it out of the park with this too. So just letting this wash settle in closer towards the armor to give it some shadow and depth, and let it escape from the ends. The lens highlight here was a bit on the cartoony side, but I wanted to go a bit more high contrast instead of trying to feather in a white. So I got some titanium white ink and just put a couple of glints, reflexes top left and bottom right. There's really not much to it. It was almost a waste of ink, because that's about all I used. That's it. Sand basing I did off camera. I totally forgot to record this, but using Vallejo's sand paste, desert sand, there you go. Using that tool and just spraying around, avoiding the miniature as much as you can. And when we go in to wash it, I'll point out, I tried to sculpt in some tracks behind the tank treads there to kind of give it a bit of motion to it, so it didn't seem like it was just sitting there for eons. And then right after that, we just go in with an ivory and just a heavy dry brush just to get all those raised details to pop out, and try and not get under the model and keep that shadow look to it. Grass tufts are a nice little touch. I can get them from Army Painter and what do you call it, GW, there's a bunch of other companies. But I super glue them here. I didn't trust the adhesive too much, so I figured and couldn't hurt to put some super glue in there. Use these sparingly, just a bit of detail to add, that's all. And here's the finished Myphitic Blight Hauler. Thanks a lot for following me on this video here and checking it out. This is my first video. I hope it came across well and you learned something from it. But this was actually a lot of fun to paint. It was not the smallest, not the biggest model, but it was enjoyable. It was really cool, and I plan to make 2 more for my army. And that's it. You know, if you would hit subscribe and thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video.